I've been working as a funeral cosmetologist for 12 years. That means I paint the dead, I cover bruises, I rebuild collapsed cheekbones, I retouch lips that never smiled in life. People don't like to think about what happens between death and the final viewing, but someone has to make the body look at peace. That someone has always been me. And until last year, I believed that nothing in a mortuary could truly scare me. Not after seeing the results of suicides, house fires, car crashes, and what a failed embalming does to the skin after 48 hours. But I was wrong. And I know exactly when that realization began. A cold Thursday morning in early February, 7:32 a.m. Room 3 of Hollow Pines Funeral Home, West Wing Prep Area. I remember the time because I just clocked in and was signing the intake sheet for a man named Darren R. Michaels, aged 39. Blunt trauma to the skull, the coroner's report read. Confirmed death at the scene. ID verified by wife. No autopsy requested. I looked at the body, tall, pale, already cleaned, and partially dressed in a charcoal suit, embalmed overnight. The fluids had settled well. The skin tone was stable. Just a bit of cosmetic work around the mouth and one swollen eyelid. Easy job. Or so I thought. I wheeled the table into position B and adjusted the overhead surgical light. I was alone. No assistance. I prefer it that way. The hum of the refrigeration unit in the adjacent wall was the only sound, aside from the muffled creaks of the building expanding in the morning cold. I placed my kit on the side tray, opened the lip wax, and began smoothing over the corners of his mouth. That's when it happened. I wasn't blinking. I wasn't looking away. His left eye, the one that had been partially bruised, stitched shut with fine nylon thread, trembled. The eyelid twitched once, so briefly that I wasn't sure it had happened. I froze. My brush hovered above his chin. I stared. Nothing. The lid remained shut. The body still. Maybe it was a muscle contraction. I told myself. Maybe the stitching was loose, the glue not fully set. I leaned closer. No air, no pulse, no warmth. Cold, dense, and completely unresponsive. Dead, undeniably. I resumed my work, but something stuck with me. I kept checking that eye, every few minutes, as if I was waiting for it to move again. It didn't. The day went on. I completed the makeup, fixed the jawline shading, retouched the bruising on the temple, and closed the collar. I even added a subtle blush to the cheeks, something I do when the skin tone is unusually pale. By noon, the body was ready. I signed off on the prep sheet and wheeled him into viewing room 2. The family wasn't due for another day, but the funeral director liked to set up the night before. I should have forgotten about it. Should have gone home and let the next job push the memory away. But I couldn't. That blink, that one motion, so slight, so utterly impossible, replayed in my mind every time I closed my eyes. I checked the intake log the next morning. Time of death had been verified by paramedics on site. He'd been under refrigeration for over 10 hours before I touched him. The embalming process had been thorough. There was no biological explanation for any twitching, not at that stage. Still, I said nothing. Funeral work teaches you to accept the strange. Fluids bubble up, skin reacts unpredictably, hair grows a fraction, nerves fire. These things happen, or at least, that's what we tell ourselves so we don't go mad. But that wasn't the last time something moved, and deep down, I knew it. A week later, I was called to work on a young woman, mid-30s, apparent overdose. No trauma, no damage, minimal preparation required. But when I turned her head slightly to align the jawline, her lips parted on their own, a soft opening, like someone exhaling after holding their breath too long. I stood frozen, listening. Nothing. No breath, no movement. Her lungs had long been drained. The air in the room remained still. And yet, that gesture, subtle and intimate, did not feel mechanical. I reported the shift to the director. He nodded, unfazed, and wrote it off as post-mortem release of pressure. He'd heard it before, he said. especially in cases of overdose. But when I asked the embalmer, he said the body had been fully processed, no residual gases left. She shouldn't have moved, he added quietly. That night, I sat at home with the lights off, re-watching old training videos. I paused at the section where my former mentor, Janet Quinn, explained the common reflexes that can happen in a corpse. Occasionally, she said, you'll see a spasm, but if the eyes twitch or the lips part after full processing, stop, step back, begin again. That was her rule. I remember laughing at it back then, thinking she was just being dramatic, but Janet was dead now, and I was beginning to understand why she had such rules. 2 more cases occurred that same month. One body kept shifting slightly on the gurney overnight. The other had visible moisture inside the nostrils, which should have dried up entirely after processing. The funeral home's CCTV? Always offline. Power-saving measures, they said. And yet, my workstation's camera feed flickered every time I stood near one of those bodies. Once, I came back from a coffee break and found the lipstick I'd placed down was now in the corpse's hand. No one else had entered. I checked the entry logs. Nothing, just me. By mid-March, I started documenting everything. Times, temperatures, chemicals used, body weights, positioning. I became obsessive, not paranoid, precise. Because deep down, I was still trying to disprove myself. I didn't want to believe what I'd seen, but then came the first real nightmare. I dreamed I was in the prep room, working late, except the lights were flickering and the walls were covered in condensation. I turned to the table, and every body I'd worked on that month was sitting upright, eyes open, staring, each of them whispering the same phrase, in perfect unison. We are not ready. I woke up gasping, soaked in sweat. It was 3:17 a.m. The street outside my window was silent. My phone buzzed once. Unknown number, no message. Just the screen lighting up, then black again. I couldn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I called out sick, and I told myself I needed a break, just a few days off, just time to clear my head. But I also knew something else, something darker and unspoken. The dead were beginning to look not just alive, but aware. That was the first time I didn't want to go back to work. But I did, because no one else could see it. No one else believed it. And if I didn't keep watching them, who would? Her name was Janet Quinn, and she taught me almost everything I know about dressing the dead. She used to wear black latex gloves that creaked whenever she flexed her fingers, and she kept her combs in surgical trays, organized like scalpels. Her hair was always tied in a bun, so tight it looked like she was trying to pull her face back with it. Janet didn't believe in sentimentality. This isn't therapy, she used to say. It's restoration. We don't honor grief. We fix what life broke. But despite that cold shell, there was a strange reverence in the way she touched the skin, how she tilted the head just so, adjusted the lighting over each face like she was framing a painting. She didn't talk much while working, unless she was training you. But there was one rule she drilled into me over and over again. If the lips tremble, start over. It's not ready yet. She didn't mean emotionally. She meant physically. She meant something else. At the time, I thought it was a metaphor, a reminder to be careful. Now, I'm not so sure. Janet died 3 years ago. Brain aneurysm. She collapsed while touching up a young man who drowned in a frozen lake. They found her on the floor, eyes wide open, hand still holding the eyeliner pencil. Some whispered that her heart gave out because she saw something, but no one said that to me. I was her last trainee, and I've never forgotten the look in her eyes when she said that phrase the first time. Not firm, not sarcastic, afraid. The second time I saw movement in the mortuary, it wasn't the eyes, it was the lips. A middle-aged man, Mr. Hollingsworth, brought in after a heart attack at the wheel. The body was intact, but his family requested a full facial reconstruction due to early-stage decomposition. When I peeled back the sheet, I smelled it immediately. Not rot, but something fainter, like warm plastic, artificial, I checked the documentation. All the proper fluids had been used. The embalmers even noted excellent response to treatment. I began the lip restoration, blending pigment into the tissue and smoothing the vermilion border. As I pressed lightly with the brush, I felt the skin tense under my fingers. Then the corner of the mouth twitched, not a spasm, but a pull, a reflex, as if trying to form a word. I dropped the brush. My gloved fingers shook. I stood still and listened. The room was silent, save for the ticking of the clock above the door. The lips moved again, barely, a tightening at the corners, almost a smirk. I backed away and left the room. 10 minutes. That's all I allowed myself. I washed my hands even though I was still wearing gloves. I paced the hallway outside. I considered calling the director. But what would I say? The corpse tried to smile. I went back in, this time with the lights brighter. I touched the lips again. No movement. The skin was stiff, cold, lifeless. I finished the work with slow, robotic precision, like someone operating through a screen. That night, I dreamed of Janet again. In the dream, she was leaning over a gurney, her gloved fingers smoothing lipstick onto a pale face. She didn't look up, just said, "Start over." Then the face turned, not toward her, but toward me, and the eyes opened wide, wide enough that the lids stretched unnaturally. I woke up gasping, a metallic taste in my mouth, as if I'd bitten my own tongue in sleep. The next morning, I opened Janet's old notes. She left behind dozens of personal training logs, all handwritten, some dating back to the early 2000s. Most of it was technical, pigment recipes, wax formulas, post-mortem skin temperature charts. But tucked between the pages was something else. A list, scribbled in blocky handwriting on a single sheet of yellowing paper. No title, just a series of statements. They move most between hours 3 and 5. Some will smile. Smile back. Never ask them questions. If the jaw creaks, don't force it. It might answer. Mirror fog. Don't breathe. If you feel watched, you are. Touch only what you must. Silence is respect, but sometimes it's survival. I read that page 10 times. I memorized it. I burned it. I told myself she was superstitious, that maybe she was already sick and her mind was unraveling when she wrote it. But a part of me, the part that watched those lips move, didn't believe that anymore. The following week, I was assigned an overnight shift. Just me and a new arrival, a woman in her 70s, unnamed, unclaimed, Jane Doe, no identification. Brought in after being found in an abandoned house on the outskirts of town. No obvious signs of trauma. The medical examiner declared natural causes, probable exposure. She'd been dead 3 days. Embalmed within 12 hours of intake. No family, no ceremony. Just make her presentable, said the director. She'll go to county. I hate those jobs the most. No one deserves to leave the world as a number. I wheeled her into the prep room and uncovered the face. Something was wrong. The eyes were open, not wide, but open enough that the whites showed. The embalmer hadn't closed them. Odd. I reached for the caps and adhesive, ready to shut them gently. But the pupils weren't right. Dilated, yes, but also reflective, as if coated in film. They seemed to follow my hand. I waved slowly to test it. No response. But I couldn't shake the sensation of awareness. I glued the lids shut, pressed gently, and moved on. Hours passed. The radio played low static. I finished her foundation and was about to apply lip stain when I remembered Janet's rule. If the lips tremble, I hesitated, stared at them, waited. Nothing. I touched them gently with the sponge, and the corners curled just slightly, enough to widen the line of the mouth. I froze again, watched. Nothing, but I swear, they had moved. Not a twitch. A change. I didn't finish. I covered her face and left the room. The rest of the night, I sat outside, staring at the prep room door, waiting for the light to flicker or the handle to turn. Nothing happened. When morning came, I told the director the body was ready. I didn't mention that I'd skipped the lips. I told myself it didn't matter. No one would see her. No one would know. But that same afternoon, when I passed by the viewing area on my way out, I saw something that made my stomach twist. There she was, the Jane Doe, placed gently in a plain gray casket. Her eyes were closed. Her lips were stained red, deep red, not the color I'd selected, not the shade in my kit. I asked the other cosmetologist if she'd finished the work. She looked confused. "I didn't touch her," she said. "You signed off, remember?" I left without answering. Since that night, I've stopped trusting the dead to stay still. I began leaving mirrors near the tables while I worked. Just small ones, not for vanity, for surveillance. You see, the bodies don't move when you're watching, but sometimes they look at their own reflection, and that's when the trembling starts. I arrived that night a few minutes after 10 p.m., coat still wet from the rain, hair sticking to my neck under the weight of humidity and exhaustion. The prep room was as I left it the morning before, clean, quiet, humming with the low breath of refrigeration units and the faint metallic scent of sterilized tools. Hollow pines always kept the back corridors darker at night, as if the overhead fluorescence feared waking what lay in wait beneath the sheets. I remember placing my bag on the counter and checking the log for new arrivals. 2 intakes, both marked for refrigeration until morning. The director had left early, and the embalmer on duty had signed off without any anomalies. All routine. I made a cup of weak coffee in the break room, passed through the viewing hall where arrangements for the Atkins family were already underway, and returned to the prep area to restock my kit for the next morning's work. I unlocked the supply drawer beneath Station C and reached for a fresh pack of dermal sealant. That's when I heard the soft scrape, barely a sound at all, like the slow drag of fabric against vinyl. I turned, assuming I'd bumped something, maybe dislodged a tray or nudged my foot against a stool, but everything was where it should have been, except for one thing. The body that had been laid out earlier that afternoon for facial prep. Mr. Mendez, age 52, diabetic complications. No trauma was no longer on the table. The white sheet that had covered him hung partially folded over the side, as if he'd been halfway unwrapped, and someone had stopped mid-task. The table straps, which I never leave unfastened, were dangling loose, the Velcro ends curled toward the floor like limp fingers. At first, I froze in place, logic overriding instinct. Perhaps he'd been moved without documentation. Perhaps another staff member had wheeled him back to cold storage and forgotten to log it. But even as I stepped toward the table, the air told a different story, heavier than before, almost wet. The smell subtly changed. It wasn't rot. It wasn't chemical. It was breath. That unspoken weight in the room when someone else is near. I turned quickly to the walk-in refrigerator, heart pounding with something not quite fear, but close enough to make my palms damp. I pulled the door open. Inside, everything was in order. 2 bodies on the left rack, 1 on the bottom. None of them Mr. Mendez. His tag wasn't there. His drawer wasn't even opened. I checked the clipboard on the hook. No new entries. No removals. I was still the only one in the building, or at least the only living one. I left the fridge open behind me, something I'd normally never do, and checked the security monitor in the corner. Static, black screen. The timestamp was frozen at 19 hours, 6 minutes, and 31 seconds. I tapped the side of the unit. Nothing. Power light was on, but no feed. The system was hardwired to run continuously, especially after the last incident with the camera over Station B, back when the screen recorded 6 hours of empty footage, but registered motion every 27 minutes, like clockwork. I stared at the screen too long, waiting for it to twitch, for the light to shift, for anything to move. But there was nothing but static, soft and pulsing, like a heartbeat muffled by snow. I circled the prep room twice, calling out loud as I did, "Mr. Mendez?" I heard my own voice bounce off the tile walls and vanish into the sterile silence. I even peeked into the supply closet, as absurd as it felt. The last place I checked was under the table, because part of me had to rule it out. Of course, he wasn't there. Of course, he wasn't hiding. But when I stood upright again, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. One of the lipstick tubes from my tray was missing. The burgundy shade I had pulled in advance for tomorrow's job was gone. Not dropped, not misplaced, gone. I tried to call the director. No answer. Tried the embalmer. Straight to voicemail. I wasn't even sure why I was calling them. What could I say? The corpse walked off. I could already hear the polite laughter, the strained silence after it. Instead, I checked every room in sequence, the chapel, the visitation rooms, the hallway, the exit doors, all locked, nothing out of place, except my memory. Because as I returned to the prep room, something inside me whispered that maybe I hadn't seen him on the table after all. Maybe the log was wrong. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I'd imagined the entire layout, the entire intake, the signature on the report. But when I checked the manifest again, there it was. Carlos Mendez, received, 2:43 p.m. embalmed, facial reconstruction pending. Assigned table, Station C. I sat down. I didn't realize I was trembling until I tried to hold my coffee again and spilled a line of it down the inside of my sleeve. I wiped it off with a sterile cloth and stared at my gloves, wondering why they felt tighter than usual. A knock echoed through the corridor, sharp once. I dropped the cloth. It came again this time, fainter. I stood, heart threatening to crawl out through my throat. The knock came from viewing room 3, unused, no scheduled services, no entries logged. I approached slowly, feet leaden. The corridor was longer than I remembered. The overhead bulbs flickered once, then stabilized. The door to viewing room 3 was shut, but not locked. I touched the handle. It was warm. Inside, the room was dark, the curtains partially drawn over the window to the street. A casket stood in the center, closed. I hadn't put it there. No tag on the handle, no photo on the pedestal. I checked the room log, blank. I opened the lid, empty. The velvet lining inside was immaculate, undisturbed, but the pillow had a single indent, faint, but visible, just enough to suggest someone had lain there, or still was. I returned to the prep room just after midnight, and there he was, Mr. Mendez, on the table, precisely where he'd been before, arms folded, sheet draped properly, lipstick tube resting neatly on the tray where I always leave it. I stood in the doorway and stared at him, my breath shallow, my thoughts scrambled. Nothing about him was out of place, except that now he had lipstick on. I didn't report it. What would I say? I finished the prep that night mechanically, like I was being watched, judged. I kept glancing at his lips, waiting for them to twitch, for his hand to rise, for the sheet to shift, but he never moved. Not again. Not while I was watching. When the morning staff arrived, I left without speaking. I went home and didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned. Later that day, I received a message from the funeral director. Great job on the Mendez case. Family said he looked at peace. I didn't respond. That week, the cameras were checked by a technician. No error, he said. No outages recorded. When I looked at the playback from the previous night, the files were corrupted. All of them, every feed, except one. From viewing room 3, it showed the empty room, the closed casket. And at exactly 12:03 a.m., the lid lifted 1 inch, then shut again. The file ends there. The day after Mr. Mendez returned to his table, as if nothing had happened, I arrived at Hollow Pines with the quiet dread of someone who knows they will not be believed, and yet must go on pretending nothing is wrong. I smiled at the receptionist. I nodded at the embalmer. I signed my name in the intake ledger, even though my hand trembled and the pen scratched unevenly on the paper. I avoided the prep room for as long as possible, choosing instead to restock minor supplies from the main office cabinets. When I finally did step through the prep corridor, everything appeared in order. There were no lipstick tubes misplaced, No empty tables, no flickering lights. But something had shifted, and not in the air. It was in the people. The embalmer, Thomas, usually jovial, had a strange tightness in his voice when I asked about the previous night's log. He told me there was nothing unusual. Then he asked too casually if I had slept well. I didn't answer. I was assigned to work with another prep specialist that morning, a woman named Grace, who'd only recently joined the team. She was quiet, older than me, and moved with the stillness of someone who had worked around death for a long time. We didn't speak much as we worked on a young woman who had passed from an allergic reaction. No trauma, minor swelling. Grace handled the torso. I focused on facial restoration. She was precise, methodical, gentle, even. But as we worked, I noticed she kept glancing not at me, but at the door. Not once or twice, but in regular intervals. I didn't ask why. I knew what it meant. She felt it too, that sense of something watching us not from beyond, but from just around the corner, like the hallway itself had lungs. The tension remained in the room long after the body was rolled out. When our tasks were done, Grace said she needed to file some papers in the intake office. I offered to help. She refused. An hour later, I went looking for her. She wasn't in the lounge, not in the chapel, not in the break room. I checked the administrative wing, thinking maybe she'd been called to meet with the director. That's when I saw the door to the registrar's office, slightly ajar. Inside, the light was on. At first, I thought she was organizing files. The old cabinets were always in disarray. But when I pushed the door open fully, what I saw made my breath knot in my chest. Grace was seated at the registrar's desk, her back to me. In front of her was a death certificate. It was blank, except for one section. The name, her name, Grace L. Merrill, written in perfect cursive. Date of death, that same day. Time, exactly 3 minutes before I entered the room. I said nothing. I stepped closer, slowly, watching her hand hover above the form, as if frozen mid-thought. She didn't turn to me, didn't acknowledge me at all. I saw her lips move slightly, mouthing words I couldn't hear. I looked at the drawer beside her, open. Inside, dozens of forms, all filled, all with her name, all with different dates, some old, some recent, some from the future. One was marked for next Thursday. One was dated 6 months ago. My knees weakened. Then she spoke. He writes them for me sometimes, but I prefer to do it myself. It's more honest this way. Her voice wasn't cold or strange. It was calm, like she was explaining a recipe. She turned her head slowly, and for the first time since I had met her, I noticed the fine discoloration around her neck, a faint bluish hue just beneath the skin, like bruising long faded. Her eyes were clear, but distant, as if she were only partially present. He? I asked, unsure if I wanted to know. The man in the blue suit. He comes when the cameras go dark. She blinked, then gently placed the pen down and stood. She walked past me without looking again. I didn't follow. I didn't touch the papers. I left the room and closed the door behind me, not knowing what else to do. The next morning, Grace didn't show up. HR said she had never been formally hired. No application, no tax records, no file. When I mentioned the name to Thomas, he stared at me, confused. Grace? We don't have a Grace. You mean Gloria? She quit last month, I described her. The silver hair tied neatly, the small scar on her left cheek, the surgical precision in her technique. No one like that here, he said. Then he added, You okay? You've seemed ... tired. That word again, tired. I went back to the registrar's office that afternoon. The cabinet was locked. The desk was clean. No papers. No forms. The only thing out of place was a single pen lying at the center of the desk. Burgundy ink. Still wet. The following night, I returned. I had to. Something about those forms, those mismatched dates, the way she wrote with ritualistic clarity, it haunted me. I brought my own key to the office, unlocked the drawer, empty, But as I slid it shut, I heard a soft thud paper falling. I looked beneath the desk. One form had slipped into the gap behind the leg rest. I retrieved it with care. It was another certificate. Another name. Mine. Time of death. 3:11 a.m. Cause unknown. I checked the clock. It was 2:42 a.m. I held the form in my hand until the sun rose, unable to move, breathe, or cry. At exactly 3:11, nothing happened. No man in a blue suit, no flickering lights, just silence. But the ink on the page had dried. I didn't sleep that day. I sat in the chapel, lights off, form folded in my pocket like a talisman I didn't ask for. That evening, the receptionist found me and said someone had left a message. A woman's voice. No name. Just 5 words, repeated twice. It has to look natural. I asked if the call had been recorded. The receptionist said the line had glitched halfway through. Nothing was saved. No incoming number. But she remembered the voice. It sounded like that new girl, she said. Grace, right? I nodded, but I said nothing, because I had already started filling out my own form, and I didn't know why. I began to notice him in fragments, like a figure painted into the corners of rooms I didn't know had artists. It started the evening after Grace disappeared, or rather, the day her existence was erased from every filing cabinet, attendance sheet, and payroll log at Hollow Pines. I told myself it was the stress, that after everything Mr. Mendez, the death certificates, the voice message, I was finally cracking. But cracks don't breathe. And on that night, when I stood over the body of a man in his 50s who had suffered cardiac arrest, I felt a breath on the back of my neck. It was warm, steady, and wrong. I turned. Nothing. Just the prep room door swinging slowly open, even though I had locked it. That was when I saw him, not fully, not yet. Just the tip of a shoe, polished, blue leather, and a shadow that remained even after the door shut again. He never approached. Not directly. His presence accumulated over days, like mold beneath paint. I'd glance at the mirror during facial reconstruction and see a sliver of navy behind my reflection. I'd look up from brushing foundation onto cold skin and catch a silhouette disappearing behind the frosted glass window of the storage corridor. It wasn't just visual. There was a tone to the air when he was near, like a frequency too low to hear, but strong enough to make my molars ache. My skin prickled with it. My fingers stiffened, but no one else seemed to notice. When I mentioned the door to Thomas, he said it probably didn't latch properly. When I brought up the flickering lights, he blamed the old building's wiring. When I asked if he'd seen anyone unfamiliar walking through the restricted zones, he simply shook his head and told me to get some rest. Rest, another word that was becoming hollow. Then one night, I stayed late, not by accident, not by schedule, by decision. I needed to know if I was imagining it, or if he was real. I chose a relatively simple case. Elderly woman, natural death. Nothing traumatic, nothing that would draw attention. I turned off all lights in the building, except for the ones in the prep room. I cleaned my brushes methodically. I placed her jewelry to the side, arranged the hairline, and began the airbrushing. My hand was steady. My mind was sharp. I was ready for hallucinations and figments. But what entered the room was neither. He did not open the door. He did not walk in. One moment the space behind me was empty. The next, he was standing by the surgical lamp, hands clasped calmly in front of him. No sound. No shadow stretching toward the floor. Just sudden presence. His suit was deep blue, not navy, not cobalt, but something darker, like ink diluted in milk. His face was almost forgettable. No remarkable features, no unusual deformities. But the longer I looked, the more I realized I couldn't quite settle on what he looked like at all. Like my brain refused to store him properly. I blinked, and his tie shifted color. I exhaled, and the lapels of his jacket realigned. But his eyes never moved. They remained on me, quiet, still, and impossibly blue. He didn't speak. I didn't either. I kept working. My brush moved to the temples, to the cheeks, to the edges of the lips. As I dipped it again, I noticed the light had changed, not flickering, but warming. The fluorescent glow of the prep room had taken on a soft amber hue, like sunlight filtered through pond water. The skin of the deceased woman responded strangely to the foundation. It absorbed too quickly. Her features, which I had softened gently into a calm repose, now appeared somehow aware. Her mouth tilted slightly at the corners. Her eyes still closed, pressed faintly against the lids, like something behind them wanted to see. And still he watched. I asked, finally, without looking up, "Why are you here?" He didn't answer in words. Instead, he nodded barely perceptible and stepped to the side of the body. He leaned down, inspected my work with the precision of a supervisor, then reached into his jacket pocket and removed something small. It was a folded paper, thick and crisp. He placed it gently onto the table beside the corpse. Then he walked toward the door. Again, it opened for him without touch, and again, he left no sound in his wake. I waited until I could no longer feel his presence. Then I opened the paper. It was a certificate of embalming, but not just any. This one bore the funeral home seal, my printed name as technician, the date and time, and the name of the deceased, Grace Elmero. Again, same date as before, same time. But this one had my signature, and the woman on the table wasn't her, or at least I didn't think it was. I looked again. I hadn't paid attention to the name tag. It had read Eleanor J. Haynes, but her features, now that I studied them, weren't they similar? Not exact, but overlapping. The same curve of the brow, the same hollow beneath the cheek, and that scar on the left jawline subtle now, but there. I dropped the brush. The lights returned to normal. I packed my things without finishing the makeup. I didn't clean my station. I didn't clock out. I went home and slept in my car, parked 3 blocks away, too afraid to dream under a roof. The next morning, when I returned, the body was gone, prepped, dressed, ready for the wake. Thomas said he finished it after I left, that I had probably just needed air. When I checked the nameplate, it had been replaced. The new one read, Grace Eleanor Hayes. Not Haynes, not Morrow. A strange hybrid. I confronted the receptionist. She shrugged, said the paperwork always had that name. I asked for the embalming certificate. She printed it. It was blank. The drawer where I kept the one from the night before was empty. I never put it in there. I realized I didn't remember where I had left it. That night, he came again. Not during a job, not at work, but in my apartment. He didn't stand in my room. He didn't knock. He was there when I walked into the bathroom, in the mirror, behind me, perfectly still. Blue suit, hands folded, the same eyes. This time, he opened his mouth, and though I didn't hear him speak, I understood what he said. It must be perfect. Then he raised one finger and pointed toward my own reflection, and I saw my face smile, but I wasn't smiling. I started keeping the prep room colder. Not because of decomposition, our refrigeration systems handled that well enough, but because of something else. A tension in the air that seemed to react to warmth, like it thrived in it, like it stretched more freely when the room was heated. I lowered the thermostat every day by a degree until I could see my own breath while brushing foundation onto lifeless skin. I wore gloves with the fingertips cut off so I wouldn't lose precision, and began arriving 2 hours earlier than my shift, just to review the paperwork before anyone else touched it. It made no difference. Names still changed. Files still vanished. Embalming reports rewrote themselves while I blinked, and worse bodies had started arriving differently. The first was a young man. Car accident. Heavy trauma to the upper half, but face mostly untouched. When I opened the body bag, I immediately felt something's stillness. Yes, but not the stillness of death. It was more like restraint. The muscles around the jaw were too tight. The eyelids didn't relax. I told myself it was nerve contraction, nothing more. I wheeled him into Station 2, adjusted the lamp, and leaned in to begin the cleansing process. But when I touched his forehead, I recoiled. It was warm. Not faintly, not the kind of lingering residual heat you sometimes get if a body is moved too quickly from the scene. It was warmth, like life, like fever. I checked the toe tag. Time of death, 4:32 a.m. Autopsy completed at 10:15. It was now past noon. No way that heat should have remained. I glanced at the eyes. Closed, of course, but uneven. Not in the way that death slackens features, but in the way people resist sleep. I pressed lightly on the lids with a swab. Nothing. Still. I continued. Applied cleaning solution. Smoothed the skin. Repaired a small gash on the temple. But just as I reached for the airbrush, I caught it. Movement. Not a twitch. Not post-mortem spasm. An unmistakable, conscious flinch. The right eyelid jumped. Just slightly. Just once. But I saw it. I stepped back slowly. Waited. Watched. My breath crystallized in the air, curling around the surgical lamp. I did not move for 10 minutes. I needed to be sure. Eventually, I approached again, slower this time. I whispered not because I expected an answer, but because silence had become unsafe. "Can you hear me?" No response. No flicker. "Do you know where you are?" Stillness. "Do you know what I am?" The left eye opened. Just a slit. Enough. Blood surged behind my ears. I stumbled backward, knocked over the tray, instruments clattering across the floor. When I looked again, the eye had shut. Mouth slightly agape. Muscles relaxed. Back to death. Back to stillness. I activated the emergency call switch. No one came. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. I turned off the light, left the room, walked calmly to the front office, and told Thomas something was wrong with the refrigeration unit. He grumbled, followed me back. When we entered, the body lay untouched. No eye movement, no warmth, no tension. Just a corpse, gray and still, with a quiet tag reading Philip J. Marin. Thomas inspected it, looked at me, raised an eyebrow. "Looks fine." I didn't argue. The next one was worse. She came in 4 days later. Elderly woman, natural death, no trauma. As soon as the bag was unzipped, I noticed her hands, clenched, fingernails embedded into the palms, leaving crescent welts. We always receive them. Relaxed post-mortem rigidity eventually softens, especially before embalming. But hers were tight, stubborn. When I tried to open one, I had to use a wedge and a heat pack. Inside her palm was a small object. Not jewelry, not cloth, paper, a torn fragment, curled and damp with blood and formalin. I pried it loose. On it, smudged by sweat and ink, was a word. Remember. That's all. No name, no context. Just that word. The kind you write in panic or urgency or hope someone else might find. I looked at her face. She looked wrong. Not injured, not deformed. Just ... aware. Like she was pretending. Eyes closed too tightly. Chin tilted slightly forward, like she was listening. I walked away. Looked through the one-way mirror. Waited. 5 minutes. 10. No movement. Then her eye opened. Not fast. Not startled. Just slow. Like curiosity. She looked straight into the mirror and smiled. I dropped the note. Ran into the hallway. Thomas wasn't at the front desk. Neither was the receptionist. In fact, the building was silent. The kind of silence that comes after something irreversible. I locked myself in the staff closet. Curled behind the shelves, listened. After a while, I heard footsteps. Deliberate, steady, too soft to be Thomas, too certain to be random. They passed the door, then stopped, right outside, breathing, but not from fatigue, from patience. They stayed for an eternity, then walked away. Later that night, when I returned, the woman was gone. No record of intake, no service scheduled. I asked Thomas about her. He said no such person had come through that week. When I insisted, he looked at me with something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Pity, like he knew something I didn't, like he'd seen it happen before. That evening, I tried to sleep. Couldn't. I stared at the ceiling, replayed the moment in the mirror again and again. Then I heard a soft sound from my kitchen. I thought it was the fridge, but it repeated. Not mechanical, rhythmic. Knock, knock, knock. I crept out, turned on the light. No one there. Then I saw it on the fridge door, written in what looked like foundation cream. A single word. Remember. Same handwriting, same smear. And on the floor, a fingerprint, pressed into the tile. Not mine. Too narrow, too long, and still damp. It was a Tuesday mid-morning when the truck arrived. Not our usual white medical transport van, but a large unmarked refrigerator truck, gray and dented, humming louder than necessary. No license plates, no identifying logos. Thomas didn't sign for it. In fact, he wasn't even in the building when it came. The driver never entered the front office. I only saw the vehicle when I stepped outside to throw out a damaged cosmetic case. It was already there, back doors wide open. The air around it was sharp with cold and chemical. Not the typical scent of formaldehyde or antiseptic, but something older, industrial, like rusted metal doused in ammonia. I felt it cling to my clothes like smoke. Inside, rows of body bags lay unceremoniously stacked like cargo. No stretchers, no trays, just plastic on steel, layers upon layers, as if the people inside had been reduced to shipment weight. I stood there too long, expecting someone to appear, until I noticed movement near the back. One of the body bags wasn't zipped fully. Its flap moved with the refrigeration pulse, a slight rhythmic flutter. I hesitated. Logic said walk away, alert the state coroner, report a breach. But nothing about the past weeks had obeyed logic, and I had long since lost faith in procedure. I stepped into the truck. The cold bit instantly. My nostrils stung. My fingers throbbed inside the gloves. I moved down the line of bags, counting. 12, all tagged. No names, just codes. CHX7, LTS89. No timestamps. No origin. No consent forms. That alone made the entire load illegal. But I kept walking until I reached the one that moved. The bag was small, child-sized. I squatted, pressed 2 fingers lightly to the side. The plastic was warm, warm, inside a refrigerator truck. I felt it again. The same tension in the skin, that restrained vibration like clenched teeth behind pale lips. I gripped the zipper and slowly pulled it down. The girl inside was no older than 16, skin pale but not sallow, hair dark and wet as if freshly washed. Her arms were crossed unnaturally over her chest, not in peace, but as if forced there. I reached for her wrist. That's when her mouth moved, not fully, just a quiver, a tremble of the lower lip, enough to know she was alive. Somehow, still warm, still faintly breathing, still here. And someone had delivered her like she wasn't. I snapped into motion, pulled her out of the truck, laid her flat on the ground. No bruising, no blood, no visible trauma. But her eyes wouldn't open. She murmured something I couldn't hear, something pressed between syllables, like a crushed insect under glass. I tried to call Thomas. No signal. I tried again. Voicemail. I was alone, and she was dying. I did the only thing I could. I brought her inside. I cleared a prep table and laid her down gently, covered her with thermal blankets, turned off the overhead lights. Her breathing was slow, shallow, but present. I leaned close. Her lips moved again. This time, I caught a fragment. Don't let them. That's all. Then silence. I checked her pulse irregular, fading. I called emergency services. Told them it was a mistake, a misdelivery, possible hypothermia, unresponsive female teen. They said help was on the way. 20 minutes, maybe more. I sat by her side, listened, waited, but I wasn't alone. Not anymore. From the back room, I heard the crash. Metal on tile. Something falling. I ran. Prep room 3, empty, but the tray was overturned. Instruments scattered. The cabinet door swung open. Inside, just the usual supplies. Except now, a new folder sat on the counter. A manila file, no label. I opened it. Inside were photos. Dozens of them, all of me. In the prep room. At home. Outside the building. Inside my car. But I hadn't taken them. And the angles weren't surveillance camera feeds. They were personal. Observational. Someone had been close. Very close. Then I heard her voice again. From the hallway. Soft. Urgent. Don't let them see. I ran back. She was gone. Blankets folded. Table clean. No footprints. Just a single sheet of paper, rolled and tied with twine, placed exactly where her head had rested. I opened it with trembling hands. It was a death certificate. Hers. Name. Unknown date of death. 6:16 a.m. Today. Cause. Cardiac arrest. En route. Signed by Dr. T. Harmon. That was Thomas's signature. But it was dated and time-stamped before I even found her. I ran to the office. Thomas wasn't there. Neither was the receptionist. The phone lines were cut. I grabbed my bag, the certificate, the folder of photos, and ran to my car. As I drove, I kept checking the rearview mirror. Not for the police, not for the girl, but for the truck. Because deep in my gut, I knew it wasn't finished. Not her, not them, and not me. At home, I locked everything. Every door, every window. I turned off every light. Hid in the hallway with a flashlight and a metal rod. I waited until dawn. No knocks. No footsteps. Then the mail slot opened. A manila envelope dropped through. On the front, my name. Inside, a Polaroid. The girl. Sitting up. Alive. Looking directly at the camera. Behind her, on the prep table, was me. Unconscious. Tag on my toe. And the date? Tomorrow. The morning after the Polaroid arrived, I didn't sleep. I sat cross-legged on my hallway floor, staring at the envelope with my name written in red ink, the photo lying beside it like an open wound. The girl's expression wasn't peaceful or vacant like before. Her eyes were wide, aware, as if she'd remembered something from the other side of death and come back just to say it out loud. But what chilled me more was what sat behind her in the picture, my own body, limp on the prep table, tagged like one of the others. The date on the toe tag read tomorrow. My mind couldn't untangle that. I hadn't been drugged, hadn't lost consciousness, hadn't imagined the night before. The pain in my hands from gripping the steering wheel, the shallow ache in my throat from screaming at the empty road, all of it was real. But the photo defied time. At 6:17 a.m., I drove back to the funeral home. Thomas' car was already parked. The lights were on inside. The front door was unlocked. The smell of bleach hit me like a wave stronger than usual. Unnaturally strong, like something had been wiped clean that wasn't supposed to be touched. The front desk was empty. The schedule board had been erased. Every appointment, every entry, scrub it off. Even the whiteboard cleaner was still wet. I walked in slow, alert. My footsteps echoed too much. Nothing felt right. I went straight to the security room. The door was open. The screens were off. The recorders were missing. Not turned off. Gone. The whole rack of DVRs that had stored over 3 years of surveillance footage pulled clean from the cabinet. Not a cable left dangling. I checked under the desk, behind the filing cabinet, even the ceiling panel. Nothing. But then I noticed something strange. A new folder on the desk. Not a manila one this time, Black, with a red seal pressed into the center. No label, just a post-it note stuck to the front. It read, "You were always meticulous. That's why we chose you." Inside were USB drives, 7 of them, each labeled with a date, each one corresponding to the last 7 days, including today. I plugged the first into the laptop, half expecting it to be blank or corrupted, but the file list loaded instantly. Each drive had folders labeled by hour, then minute, like someone had already indexed the footage. I opened the one for 2 nights ago, the night the girl had arrived. I watched and watched, but something was off. In the footage, I never walked into the truck. I never pulled her out. I never brought her inside. Instead, the camera showed me standing by the dumpster, frozen, staring at the truck for a full 20 minutes. I didn't move. The truck didn't open. And when it left, it showed the doors never opened at all. The next clip showed me entering the prep room empty-handed. I turned on the lights, stared at the table, and then just left. I searched the footage again. No sign of her. No trace of the body. No blankets. No thermal wrap. Nothing. It was like she was never there. Or like I was, alone. I plugged in the next USB, this one from the day the certificate was signed. I opened the footage for 3:41 p.m., the moment I had found the folder with the death certificate. In the footage, I enter the room, but I'm not holding anything. I don't find any folder. I just walk to the sink, stare into the mirror for a full 3 minutes, unmoving. Then I turn and leave. No expression, no urgency, no panic. Each folder, each drive, told the same story. What I remembered was not what was recorded. And what was recorded showed me as a silent, empty shell, moving like I was half asleep, performing none of the frantic actions I had lived and remembered with perfect clarity. But then came the final file, labeled simply tomorrow. It wasn't supposed to be possible. The timestamp read 10:12 a.m. tomorrow's date. In the clip, I'm back in the prep room, lying on the table. A toe tag hangs off my foot. The name field is typed out. June Darrow. Date of death, tomorrow. Time, 10:03 a.m. The door opens. The girl walks in, fully alert. Hair dry, clothes pressed. She looks straight into the camera and smiles. Not kindly, not warmly, but knowingly. Then the footage glitches, freezes, corrupts. The rest of the file is unreadable. I pulled the drive out, my fingers numb. My own name on the death tag, my face pale and unmoving, and her alive, restored, watching, like she had taken my place. I called the police. Of course I did. They arrived quickly, a sign that someone had already tipped them off. 2 officers, polite, professional. They asked if I'd experienced any recent stress. I told them about the files. They asked to see them. I handed over the USBs. They took them, didn't open them, didn't even look surprised. Then they thanked me, said they'd file a report, and left. I never saw those drives again. That night, when I tried to log into our internal mortuary network, my credentials were revoked. The admin email bounced. I called Thomas. Disconnected. The next morning, I arrived at the funeral home. It was closed, shutters down, windows boarded. A new sign on the door. Under renovation, no trucks, no staff, no record of our business license. Gone, as if we had never been there. But when I returned home that afternoon, there was a package on my doorstep. Inside, one final USB, labeled only with my initials. I haven't opened it, because I know what it shows, and I don't want to see myself blink. It took me 2 days before I found the strength to open the final USB. I didn't plug it into my laptop. I drove to a friend's photo studio in the city, an old one, the kind that still used analog cameras and had a darkroom in the back. He owed me a favor from years ago when I did the post-mortem work on his father and made sure the man looked dignified despite the damage of the accident. I asked to use a clean desktop, offline, no Wi-Fi, no cords connected to any network. He let me in after hours and stayed in the front. I locked the back room, turned off the lights, and sat at the desk with the USB in hand for a long time, trying to convince myself that whatever I saw wouldn't change anything. But I already knew it would. I inserted the drive, one single file, no title, no metadata. I hovered the mouse over the file and noticed something odd. The preview image was my own face, not looking into the camera, but glancing just over the shoulder of whoever was holding it. like I was being observed while observing. I clicked. The video began with silence. 30 seconds of black screen. Then, audio. A soft mechanical hum, like that of refrigerated air, mixed with a static buzz. The video faded into an image I didn't expect. The embalming room. The old one. Not the prep room I worked in, but the closed chamber we stopped using 5 years ago after a leak in the refrigeration unit ruined the floor. No one went in there anymore. It was sealed shut. In the video, the camera panned slowly across the room. There were 8 tables, each covered in a white sheet. The footage was in black and white. Timestamp in the corner. Today, 3:44 a.m. The first table revealed a male body, mid-30s, chest opened and stitched. Typical autopsy Y incision. The sheet was pulled back mechanically by an unseen hand. The camera zoomed in. Just behind the ear, below the hairline, an incision. Clean, precise, curved like a surgeon's blade, had kissed the skin with clinical intent. No bruising, no inflammation. It wasn't a post-mortem injury. It was healed. The footage continued, table after table. A woman in her 20s, another man in his 50s, even a child each time. Same scar behind the ear. Not exactly in the same location, but close enough. And not the result of any known medical procedure I could identify. I'd done hundreds of facial reconstructions. I'd seen cranial shunts, cochlear implants, even exhumed remains with post-mortem cranial drills. But this wasn't that. The skin was too perfect. No disruption of underlying tissue. It was as if whatever had made those cuts had gone in and out without trauma. The final body on the 8th table made my stomach collapse. It was the girl, the first girl, same scar. But this time it was open. No stitches, no clotting. Just an incision with nothing inside. The tissue was hollow, like something had been taken out. Or worse, inserted and removed without leaving trace. Then something truly impossible happened. Her eye twitched. Just once. A blink, like muscle memory. The camera didn't flinch. No one in the room. No noise. Just that tiny, subtle movement, as if her body wasn't done yet. As if it was waiting. The screen cut to black. Then a new scene. A close-up of a piece of paper. A form. A death certificate. Not mine this time. Not hers. It was a blank template, auto-filled by a system. The field for cause of death blinked, then auto-populated. Reassignment failure. The field for identifying marks read, Otic scar present. Then the form refreshed with a new name. Another person. Another scar. The list grew names I didn't recognize. But I realized with sickening clarity that every body I had worked on in the past 6 months had likely had the same mark. And I had missed it. Or rather, I had seen it, dismissed it, assumed it was surgical, a biopsy, maybe something trivial. Because that's what the brain does when it sees something too big to understand. It renames it, minimizes it, files it away under nothing. But I remembered something else then. A memory from 3 months ago. A man, middle-aged, who had come in after what was reported as a routine cardiac failure. His skin had been unusually cold. His file said he died at 3:12 a.m., but his body temp indicated he'd been dead much longer. I recalled lifting his head to position it for neck support. That's when I had noticed it. A scar, so clean it looked like part of his anatomy. I had run my finger over it. It felt like healed skin, slightly raised. I wrote it off as an implant site and moved on. Now I wasn't so sure. I went through my phone and found the photo archive. I had snapped pictures of almost every client for documentation. I scrolled for that man, found it, zoomed in. The scar was there. So I searched more, one by one, and there they were, 32 cases. Same scar, some behind the ear, some at the base of the skull, one even beneath the jawline, different placements. Same pattern, always healed, never mentioned, never documented, and yet always there. A creeping pattern, invisible until you knew how to see it. I closed the folder and sat back. My pulse was racing. my body cold. That's when I noticed the camera in the studio ceiling had a red light blinking, recording. I hadn't turned it on. My friend hadn't either. I pulled the plug from the wall. The light stayed on. I turned off the breaker for the whole room. Still blinking. That's when I left. Took the drive. Destroyed it. Or at least tried to. Smashed it with a hammer. Drowned it in bleach. Burned it until the plastic curled and cracked like dry skin. But the next morning, in my apartment mailbox, there it was again. Same USB. Same red seal. No label. I didn't even take it inside. I drove 3 towns over and dropped it in a storm drain. 2 hours later, I got a text message from an unknown number. It read, "That wasn't very respectful, June. We gave you access. We trusted your eyes. No one should have had that number." I hadn't used that name in a decade, but they knew. They knew what I'd seen, what I'd learned, and worse, they knew I hadn't told anyone. Because deep down, I knew what the scar meant. It wasn't just a mark. It was a signature, a sign that something had been rewritten, repurposed, reassigned. And if every one of those bodies had the scar, then maybe they weren't the only ones. Maybe I had one too. I ran to the bathroom, turned my head in the mirror, pulled back my hair, and froze. Not because the scar was there, but because I couldn't find the spot where it should have been. The skin was too smooth, too perfect, as if someone had erased more than the scar, as if someone had erased the memory of what I used to be and replaced me with someone else entirely. I told myself I was done. After the message, after the USB reappeared in my mailbox, and I saw what should have been impossible in the mirror. No scar, not even a trace, just skin that looked too clean, too manufactured. I swore I would never return to the funeral home again. But when you've worked in that world as long as I have, you realize something unsettling. The dead don't let go of you just because you try to walk away. They follow, not physically, no, at least not at first, but in memory, in dreams, in coincidences that don't feel like coincidence. A flicker in a dark room, a voicemail that deletes itself before you can replay it, a name in an obituary that you're sure was already buried months ago. And then came the call. No number, no voice, just silence, but I knew what it was. Not a request, a summons. I showed up at dusk, even though I told myself I wouldn't. I didn't bring my tools, no makeup kit, no brushes, no skin putty or preservative balm, just keys and gloves. When I opened the side door to the embalming suite, the overhead lights flickered once, then stabilized. No one was inside, not a single attendant, but the air was not still. It was too still. There's a difference. When air sits heavy in a room, unmoved for hours, you feel the weight of it. But this was silence that pressed in on the chest, a silence that had been staged, like it was waiting for something, or someone. I walked to the prep chamber and froze. The table was already in place, the white sheet drawn perfectly over the form beneath. No wrinkles, no blood, no odor of chemicals, just a faint trace of something metallic in the air, like warm copper. I approached slowly, hands shaking even though I'd told myself for years I no longer feared the dead. That was a lie. We all fear them, not because of what they are, but because of what they show us, what we will one day become. I reached for the sheet, pulled it back. The breath left me in a rush I didn't feel until I heard my own lungs force it out like a gasp that had waited too long. It was me, or someone who looked like me, identical, same facial structure, same scar that I didn't have, hairline to ear, precise, not healed, open, but not bleeding, just raw, as if it had just been made moments ago, as if the skin had been peeled back, examined, and set loose again like a warning. I stepped back, stumbled against the tray of instruments that I never laid out, knocked over a scalpel that clattered against the floor and didn't stop ringing. I looked again. The eyes were open. They hadn't been a moment before. They were dull, yes, but watching, not with curiosity, not with accusation, just observation. The way I had once looked at corpses myself, years ago when I still believed I was the one in control of the room. Now I understood what the bodies must have felt, if they had ever felt anything, what it meant to be unmade. I turned to leave. The door was already closed. I hadn't touched it. I didn't hear it shut, but it was locked. The lights dimmed one notch, enough that the edges of the room dissolved into a gray blur, and all that remained illuminated was the table and the body that was impossibly me. The air shifted. I smelled something then. Not rot, not formaldehyde, ozone. Clean, unnatural, like static trapped in a glass jar. And something else, something underneath, like warm milk gone sour, but hidden behind perfume. My skin crawled. I looked at the body again and saw the mouth was slightly parted now, as if it wanted to speak. I reached for the drawer out of habit, even though I hadn't stocked it in months. It was empty, except for a small black envelope. No name, no wax seal, just folded once, placed as if someone wanted me to find it only at the exact moment I no longer had a choice. I opened it. Inside was a photo, a group shot, maybe a dozen people, all wearing makeup aprons like mine, all standing in front of the funeral home. But it wasn't the building I knew. It was older, darker, and every face in the photo was me. Some older, some younger, different haircuts, some with glasses, some with none, but all me, and all with the same scar behind the ear. I dropped the photo, or maybe it dropped itself. I don't remember letting go. The table was empty now. No body, no sheet, no blood, no me. The drawer was gone. The lights flickered again. Then the intercom turned on. Static first. Then a whisper. My name. Not the one I used. The original one. The one no one knew. Not anymore. I tried the door again. It opened. Not like before. It simply wasn't locked anymore. I stepped out. The hallway was longer than it should have been. I counted steps. 42. The hallway was only 20 meters in total, but I walked until my legs ached, and still the door never came. When I finally reached the front of the building, the street outside was gone. Not dark, gone. Just an infinite stretch of gray, like a sky without stars had collapsed downward and swallowed the horizon. I stood in the doorway and waited. I'm not sure for what. Maybe for myself. Maybe for whoever had left the envelope. Maybe for the person I used to be. Then the phone rang. I walked back in, picked it up. The voice was my own. It said only one thing. She's not dead yet. Then silence. I left the building, drove for hours, checked into a hotel I didn't recognize under a name I'd never used before. I don't sleep anymore. I don't dream. I don't age, I think. I don't bleed. I looked at my wrist last week after a cut, and the skin was closing before I even blinked. No clot, no tissue disruption. I'm not sure I'm alive in the way I used to be, but I can still speak. I can still tell you this. Because tomorrow, they're bringing in another body. And this time, I know I won't just recognize the face. This time, I'll know what's inside, and I won't be afraid to open it, because I think I finally understand what I've become. Not a funeral home makeup artist, not even a witness, but a vessel, a continuation. And what comes next won't be for the living. It never was.